The Vietnam War wasn't just another chapter in American history, it was a defining moment. It began in the shadows of the Cold War, with the United States determined to prevent the spread of communism. Vietnam, a small Southeast Asian country, became the unlikely battleground for one of the most controversial wars of the 20th century. But how did it all begin? The seeds of the conflict were planted long before American involvement. In the mid-20th century, Vietnam had been a French colony, but after World War II, it sought independence. Ho Chi Minh, a communist revolutionary, emerged as the leader of the Viet Minh movement, pushing for freedom. This ignited a struggle between North Vietnam, backed by the Soviet Union and China, and South Vietnam, supported by the United States. America, committed to the policy of containment, stepped into the fray, setting the stage for a devastating war. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident became the catalyst for direct U.S. military involvement. Reports of North Vietnamese attacks on U.S. naval vessels led Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving President Lyndon B. Johnson the authority to deploy American forces. What began as a limited advisory mission escalated into a full-scale war. American troops landed in Vietnam, armed with advanced weaponry and a belief that victory was inevitable. But they soon discovered that the jungles of Vietnam were an unforgiving battlefield. The Viet Cong, a guerrilla force from the north, used unconventional tactics, ambushes, booby traps, and underground tunnels that neutralized America's technological superiority. While battles raged in Vietnam, a different kind of war unfolded at home. The American public, initially supportive of the mission, grew increasingly disillusioned as the war dragged on. Graphic images of the conflict filled television screens, showing the brutal realities of napalm strikes, burned villages, and wounded soldiers. The draft fueled resentment, as young men were sent to fight a war many didn't believe in. Protests erupted on college campuses, with the anti-war movement becoming a powerful force. Demonstrations, sit-ins, and marches culminated in iconic moments like the 1969 moratorium to end the war in Vietnam, where hundreds of thousands gathered in Washington, D.C., demanding peace. The division wasn't limited to the streets. Families were split, friendships strained, and trust in the government eroded. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, revealed that successive administrations had misled the public about the war's progress, further deepening the divide. The Vietnam War was marked by pivotal events that shaped its trajectory. The Tet Offensive in 1968 was one such moment. North Vietnamese forces launched a coordinated series of attacks on over 100 cities in South Vietnam. While the offensive was a military failure for the North, it shattered the illusion that the U.S. was winning the war. Another significant event was the My Lai Massacre in 1968, where American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians. When news of the atrocity reached the public, it further fueled anti-war sentiment and raised questions about the moral cost of the conflict. By the early 1970s, it was clear that the Vietnam War was unwinnable. President Richard Nixon implemented a policy of Vietnamization, aiming to shift the burden of fighting to South Vietnamese forces while gradually withdrawing American troops. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, officially ending U.S. involvement. But peace was short-lived. In 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, marking the end of the war and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. For America, the war ended not with victory, but with the haunting images of helicopters evacuating desperate civilians from the U.S. Embassy roof. The Vietnam War left deep scars on both Vietnam and the United States. Over 58,000 American soldiers lost their lives, and millions of Vietnamese civilians and combatants alike were killed. The war decimated Vietnam's infrastructure and left a generation grappling with the horrors of Agent Orange and unexploded landmines. In the U.S., the war had profound cultural and political effects. It shattered the nation's confidence and left a legacy of distrust in government. Veterans returned home to a country that was divided and, in many cases, indifferent to their sacrifice. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, unveiled in 1982, became a place of healing and reflection, inscribed with the names of those who gave their lives. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Vietnam War is its lessons. It forced America to confront the limits of its power and the consequences of interventionist policies. It remains a sobering reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of questioning authority. The Vietnam War was a conflict that shattered America, leaving wounds that still resonate today. It was a war that tested the nation's ideals, its unity, and its humanity. As we look back, we honor those who served, those who protested, and those who paid the ultimate price. In remembering Vietnam, we carry forward its lessons that the true cost of war is never just measured in numbers, but in the lives it changes forever.